So we had everybody ask for a walk around video. So I'm going to do a walk around video on this. We just completed the first home field flight. Had a bunch of people in attendance. I'll post some pictures online. I got a champagne bath for having finally gotten this done by my wife and my sons. But walk around video. So this is the Mosquito. This is the XET version. You tell that by the engine that's on it. That's a gas turbine engine, as opposed to the other two versions which have reciprocating engines. But we'll talk about everything in common first before we go through what the gas turbine itself provides. So let's look at, we'll start at the tail. So the tail has solid drive from the engine all the way back through the tail into the tail rotor itself. There is a cable that's the control piece that comes out. So you can see that cable control right there. That comes up through here. We've got pitch change links on both sides. Main mounting hub out here. And this is the control mechanism. You can see it's all done through a bunch of bearings and cams on the way out. Tail rotor gearbox, and I do have a temperature sensor on it. This is the overflow pressure relief. Got a horizontal stabilizer, or vertical stabilizer, sorry. And for anybody that's from one of my old squadrons, that's the lamplighter logo that's on it. VHF antenna, that is where the horizontal stabilizer would go. I don't have one right now. I've heard some pros and cons. I'm going to wait and see how I like it in flight first. We'll come out to the head. So kind of standard head, pitch change links on two sides. And that's kind of it. Blade grips and the rotors themselves. You will notice that on the trailing edge we've got trim tabs. So if you notice in flight some of the vibration, mostly vertical vibration, you're going to see we're going to trim that out as we fly. We're going to identify that with some lights. There's a set of lights that mount to the trailing edge, the outside edge of the rotor blades. Those lights will give you a green or a red for which blade it is, and then in flight we can adjust those, or not in flight, once we land we can adjust those trim tabs and try to take out that vibration for whatever speed you're going to cruise at. Above and below it'll still go. It'll increase some because of dissymmetry of lift, but that is the intent. This thing is belt driven outside of the shaft. So for the reductions, we've got a belt reduction here, last stage reduction. Main rotor turns at about 598 RPM, where the engine's turning at just shy of 6,000 RPM. It's horrible of me as a Navy guy, but I don't remember the tail rotor RPM off the top of my head. I believe it is just shy of 3,000 RPM. But at any rate, we've got a belt drive reduction here. We've got flex shafts here, and one inside that all allow for tension and torsion transfer between those shafts. And then you've got a belt drive here that's your starter. Drives the start of the engine, and then this is the main drive belt from the engine up to the intermediate. So we've got an intermediate or splitter gearbox that sits right inside here. That transfers solid drive down to your tail rotor, and then the rest of the solid drive up to your main rotor. Main gearbox, engine itself, the gas turbine, single stage gas turbine, radial, so radial inflow here, single stage here, one rotor, one stator, combustion can here, and then obviously the exhaust. Hobbs meter that you see right there on the right hand side. In this aircraft, this is the spread clutch. That's what engages the rotors. So in this aircraft, somewhere around 45 to 55% is where you kind of need to be smooth and make sure that that's engaged and it doesn't slide and glaze the engagement mechanism, because inside this is basically a set of brake pads. Those brake pads are spring controlled. They fly out to engage that spread clutch, and as long as they're engaged, then you're good. If during that engagement period you accelerate too fast, then it will glaze those brake pads, and they won't engage as well or at all. So that's something you do have to watch for the start. Main gearbox, the only thing we did to this to get the engine to fit is the planetary gear's got a little different joining mechanism for this gearbox to come out of it. So we did take it apart to the planetary gear, put in a couple of extra gears ourselves to make that function. And then on the back, primary fuel pump and primary fuel filter are on the back. On the bottom you see auxiliary fuel tank, 8 gallons. Main fuel tank is part of the body up here, and it's 12 gallons. Got 20 gallons of fuel. Looks like it's going to burn roughly 12 and a half gallons an hour. So that gives you, with reserve, somewhere about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes of flight, depending on what flight regime you're in. Let's see. Covered the main rotor, so into the aircraft itself. Stick. Oh, cord. So we've made a home fashioned anti-mass bumping stop here because this is semi-rigid underslung. You want to make sure that that thing's not slamming on the rotor as you're moving it, or the wind moving it back and forth. So that's in there. That's to remind me to take it out before I fly. What else we got? Electronics and controls. So all the electronics, for the most part, are wired through there, with the exception of some of the breakers and the coolie hat are controlled through that little breaker panel that's right underneath the seat, just for controlling screens, between screens, changing your radio, that kind of stuff. Single piloted, you have to have something that you can control while you're strapped in. We don't have an inertial wheel. You can see that all the mounting points for the straps are solid. So that is one thing I'm trying to figure out a solution for, because once you're strapped in, you can't reach most of the switches and breakers. So rest of the controls are done down here. That is the mixing assembly. So you got the collective, you can watch it bring everything up and down. And then on the front, you have the cyclic, which you can see it there. All those are mixed in a series of bearings, can come up through the controls. And then at the top, this is our swash plate. Certainly not what we're used to seeing on a military aircraft, but that is the swash plate. And you can watch it with the series of controls. It works just like a swash plate, collective and cyclic. So everything works just like you're thinking about, but on a different scale, obviously. Electronic stuff. So we've got an extender here for the electronic flight information system, and then the main controller. That's all of our inputs coming from anywhere in the aircraft. They're going to go back to the front. We've got a 12 volt and a 24 volt bus. You can see a battery on each side right here. So we've got two 12 volts in parallel to make 24 volts. The only other thing of note back here is the aux tank fuel pump down here, and a fuel filter. So that's how you get fuel from your aux tank up into the main tank. Out to the front, cyclic, pretty standard. Starter, which is a hold on. Igniter on the bottom left, which is a on or off. Collective friction, which is done here. And then your conf button, which is pretty standard. What else do we have? Breaker panel. So all these are click-ons, so they both work as a breaker and a switch. So instead of having two separate pieces in something with this little room, we just use one that does everything. You can see from the panel that I've got kind of everything you can get in here, short of IFR, because we don't have dual compasses and dual sources for GPS. But we've got a transponder, have ADS-B in and out, radio, nav and landing lights, aux and primary fuel pump, and then the start sequence stuff on the top, starter, fuel switch, and the igniter. EFIS, so we have a, oh, where are we? So the EFIS, this is the primary set of controls, engine, rotor RPM, gearbox temps and pressures at the bottom right. Bottom left is voltage, fuel capacity or fuel quantity, and fuel flow. And then at the top you can see it's got the GPS, transponder, comm, nav, that kind of stuff. You can switch between screens. So full nav, you still got your engine, rotor RPMs at the bottom. Go away. And all your engine controls, so you can still see that stuff while you're flying around at speed, looking at your nav chart, which also has targets, airspeed, or targets and airfields. Back wrong way. A little more standard set of instruments if you like that panel, but that's more for fixed wing guys. Inertial navigation piece, and back to the main screen. So 5 or 6 screens you can pre-program. All those can be flipped between with the coolie hat. I think we only do 4 directions instead of 8, but it allows you to flip between and select, so you can pop up to your radio and change frequencies, that kind of stuff. The only other piece on the screen, on the panel, is the radio, and the radio has, if I can find it here, radio. You can adjust it manually on the screen and switch between a primary and a standby. Haven't delved into the programming to find out if I can put more frequencies in as you go. Again, single piloted, that becomes kind of interesting. So that's something I'm going to have to play with as we go. Aircraft does a good job starting up just on those batteries, and then there is an alternator on the other side, which you'll see here in a second, but to keep those batteries charged. So took off today, started it up with that radio in, or with that just the batteries, and we didn't have an issue. So on this side of the aircraft, that is the alternator, and it's attached at assembler point to the fuel control. We thought that fuel control was the issue. Turned out not to be. Was the can, but so that is a newer can for me. That's the one that fixed our problem. So fuel system come down. This is an inline paper filter, pressure sender, comes down for a drain, and then starts part of the fuel system. Like we saw from the other side, fuel pump on the far side, fuel filter on the close side. These 2 solenoids here are part of the start and run fuel system. So to get it started, you'll have fuel coming in here for the initial light off, and then when you go to run after that, then all the igniters in the system come on. What else do we need? Rotor RPM, I'm sorry, engine RPM. Rotor RPM is a similar one, but it is, oh, there it is, right at the top. So rotor RPM probe comes right up here. That is the engine RPM probe, and just a proximity contact. I think that's it. What else do we need to look at? Skids, you can see we've got wires for reinforcing for hard landings, just to keep the gear from spreading. So you may have noticed in some of the flight videos that we had some vibration in the skids. When I just went up on this last flight, I took note of it. Translational lift, transition, period. You see a lot of vibration in the skids. At altitude, you still see some, But again, that's what we're going to use the trim for, the trim tabs. Try to trim that out in flight and see if we can limit that. Obviously, you don't want any vibrations that you don't have to have. But we want to make sure that it's not blade tracking or balance or lead lag. So on the rotor head, we adjust lead lag with these on both sides. We did just check that in the factory when I was in there on Tuesday, and we're less than a 1/4 inch over the 22-foot span of the rotor. So I was afraid to start adjusting them anymore, because over that span, just a very small change there, you'll be a 1/4 inch the other side. I want to see first if what we did, what we do with the skids and the in-flight tracking with the trim tabs helps us with that vibration. So the recommendation so far has been, in flight, we'll put the light set on, we'll adjust the trim tabs for whatever our desired 80 knot cruise, 85 knot cruise, and then we'll come down on the skids themselves, and in the end of the tubes we'll pour some lead in a similar tube for that size, put a hook on it to where we can get it back out, and drop some lead down in there. After talking to Dwight, that recommended weight should be about 3 pounds. So I'm going to look at first 3 pounds on one side and 2 on the other, see if that will do any good, and then you just start playing with the weights to see how to get that vibration out of there. But as you can see, those are just, I mean, that's the only way they're attached is on the center. So any vibration at all in the aircraft, those are just big tuning forks out there at the end, and they are going to vibrate. So one of the inspection points will be to make sure that as we're vibrating and going through flights, that we don't have any kind of stress fractures or issues, both here at the connection points and under the aircraft at the attachment points. That vibration in and of itself, the component vibration, is not as much of an issue as what's causing that vibration. So we want to make sure that our main rotors are not vibrating, causing that due to either out of balance, out of track, or a lead lag issue. So those are the things we'll be trying to get out of the aircraft during this testing phase. Like I said, we got 32 hours, 31 left now, going through the testing phase to get wind parameters, engine parameters, fuel burn rates, and those kind of issues worked out, so that hopefully at the 40-hour mark we're through all that testing. Good thing about the gas turbine is once it's on and running, as long as it doesn't have an issue, you don't do anything to it. It doesn't have a TBO. It's basically on inspection. So unless you have a hard landing, hot start, some kind of an issue with the engine itself, it runs till it dies. Unlike the recips that you end up, I don't know, 25, 50, 75-hour periods, pulling rings and cylinders and heads and those kind of things, the engine just runs. And that means that for the most part, all the mechanics behind there just run. There is a 500-hour on this where everything that turns comes off. So all those bearings in the mixer assembly, all the bearings, the blade grips, everything that turns in the head,